Hi, it's Dr. Jan with some wise words to work with. And our organizational cultures are probably the most influential component of our professional life. It's how we learn how we're supposed to behave and interact, what's expected, what's not expected, what can we do, what can we not do, right? Because our organizational foundation are those written and unwritten rules and norms and values that our organization have that tell us what we should be doing or what's not acceptable. And as soon as we walk into the door or we log onto our computer, if we're working remotely, we are beginning the socialization process, of what we should be doing and what's expected. And so most of us, myself included, think we're going to get into an organizational culture that's healthy and resilient. Not perfect, but healthy and resilient. And I know for myself, I never thought about getting into a place where I would be bullied or there'd be workplace bullying. That never crossed my mind. Never in a million years did I think that would happen. And so the assumption is that when we get a job, the assumption is that organizational culture is healthy and resilient. And we know in a lot of organizations, that's just the furthest thing from the truth. Okay. But when we're talking about organizational culture, one of the things we have to wonder is when things are unacceptable, okay, from the outside looking in, right? Yelling at your colleagues, swearing at your colleagues, making a pass at your colleagues, those sorts of things. Why do people sit back and just watch those things happen? Why don't more people stand up for what's right, if you want to use that terminology? And that's because what we know about human nature is very few people will stand up in the face of group scrutiny. Okay. So in groups, most people will go along to get along. If you want to look at the term mob mentality, is in mobs, right? People will do things that they normally wouldn't do. Well, those same sorts of things are happening in our organizations. So if we merely look at workplace bullying, for example, there are people being yelled at, called names, physically assaulted, verbally assaulted in our workplace, while other people just sit back and watch it happen. And that's because they will go along to get along. And also, we are not training people how to stand up against mob mentality or groups. So in the workplace, what happens is as soon as you open the door and you walk into the organization, you are socialized into either a healthy work environment and in many cases, a toxic or bully culture. And so when you walk out the door, you know that yelling at somebody and swearing and calling names, et cetera, is wrong, but you have become socialized into those behaviors as part of your everyday work life because it's normal, right? For you, that's normalized behavior. So sometimes when people are looking into toxicity, bully culture, for example, they'll say, well, that's wrong. But, why is everybody watching? It's because for those people around the table in bully culture, they have been socialized into that. Okay. So for example, let's say you're hired as a teacher and you have your first meeting and the principal is demeaning and yelling at the administrative assistant, okay, because he didn't do something that the principal wanted. And what's your first reaction to that? Is probably the hair on the back of your neck is going to stand up and you're going to think, what is going on? Okay. And then you're going to look around the room at your colleagues. And what you're going to see is people looking down, not making eye contact. Nobody says anything. Okay. And even though you know it's wrong, you probably will end up doing the same thing. Okay. Because you're looking to your peers who've been there for a while. You're looking to them for help. And they're signaling to you by not doing anything and looking down that that's not going to happen. That this is what we do when we see this behavior, when we see yelling, Okay, and we see the principal as a bully and he's bullying the administrative assistant, we don't do anything. Okay, so that's probably what you're going to do. And over time, that behavior that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up now is normalized, and it doesn't even cause you to look or think twice. Okay, and so that's how bully culture becomes normalized. And so what we should be doing is teaching people how to stand up in organizations where there might be problems. And even in healthy, resilient organizations, it's perfectly okay for somebody to stand up and say, this makes me uncomfortable. Okay, that in a healthy work environment, those things get incorporated into change and the organization adapts to it. But when somebody stands up in bully culture or toxic work environment, what happens is that person often becomes the target. So there's certainly a risk, okay? But I am in favor of planning ahead versus I just think I can wing it, okay? So if we learn how to stand up against bullies, so to speak, okay, we can develop a plan of action before those things happen, and then we're more likely to do it. Okay, if we think about it, think about a scenario where there could be toxicity or bullying could be happening in your organization. You've thought about it. You've developed a plan of action. You've processed in your head how you can respond. The likelihood that when that scenario arises, okay, you'll actually stand up against bullying rather than thinking, I already have the skills to do it. Because what happens in bullying situations or toxicity is we are it shakes us, right? It knocks us off our solid footing of being a professional. And by the time we've responded, the incident's over and we have just sat by and watched it. So I'm going to encourage you to think about scenarios where these things could arise in your workplace, where somebody could be yelling at someone, where somebody could be sending out an inappropriate email. And what could you do to respond? So a lot of times in situations, we don't have to get up and say, I think this is wrong. Okay. We can do things like get up and leave a meeting. We can interrupt the bully who's yelling at the target. We can do minor things which have a major impact on the organizational culture. So there are a lot of things that we can put into place ahead of time or think about ahead of time that can really show disapproval for toxic behavior and bullying behavior, but that can also stop the behavior in its track. So I really encourage you to think about some scenarios that may or could arise in your organization and think about what you could do, make a plan, and even role play if you want to. In your head, I do a lot of, thinking about scenarios and developing ways that I could respond to that. And then I practice those over and over in my head, because when you prepare for something like bullying or toxicity and how to respond, you're more likely to be able to respond in situations if you have a plan of action that you can go to. Because some of these things are so off-putting, some of these things are so disturbing that when it happens, we just don't know what to do. But by thinking ahead, planning ahead, and developing how you can respond, you can actually stand up against systematic dysfunction and toxicity and bullying. And if more people do that, we're going to have less organizational cultures that are toxic and dysfunctional. And so we'll move our dysfunctional organizational cultures to those that are functional and are better and healthier for all of us to work in. Thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. And again, if you have any comments, you can always email me at jan@stopbullyculture.com.